What up, Mr. Young? How you doing today?
Blessings, blessings, my brother. Blessings. All's well, man. All's well.
Glad you can make it. Welcome to Let's Talk Under the Tree. I'm Mr. Palmer, your host for tonight. Two South Carolina boys hooked up by way of somebody that you know and I know. Due to security reasons, they said there's some kind of FBI agent in waiting. I won't say their name, but that's just a joke. You know how that go. But we're glad that we could have you, man. And it's a blessing that you're on here to tell your story to the world and you're not ashamed, you know, things that you went through. You know, and God is a forgiving God. And, you know, everybody have, I call it a skeleton in the closet that we should not be ashamed of to tell our story.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure he had to work with you to give you the confidence to come out in public because you're a bad man to do something like that, you know, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, I wish you many endeavors. I'm going to tell you that in advance because I don't think I could come on here in public and do what you do. You know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. And we going to, you know, ride out tonight for a little while, for about 45 minutes. And you're going to tell your story and, you know, have a good time, laugh, joke. You might even cry. You never know how under the tree might take us. And we appreciate you. And I'm going to give you a round of applause just for showing up, man.
Let's get it, man. Let's get it.
We're going to take a break and welcome the show, and we'll be right back in a few minutes. Everybody get ready.
Who is you? Yeah, this is a story of things done. The dog is done. The dog.
Are we back? Mr. Lester Young, Path to Redemption.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I read your bio. I know you started with some things at 16 years old. You said you lost your mother. So I'm going to let you go forward and tell your testimony as we go forward right now.
Okay, cool. Again, I thank you, brother, for inviting me to be under the tree for a great conversation, a great Southern conversation, right? I would just say absolutely. My journey has been a journey just like so many other people. So many people come from our communities, meaning that we experience some trials and tribulations early in our lives. And some of us, we get impacted by a situation. Some of us make poor choices. For me, it started when I was 16 years old. When my beloved mother passed away at a period in my life where we had an argument the night before she passed, and we never had an opportunity to make amends with that argument over a simple thing as washing the dishes, right? And because of that, I internalized that grief of not having that opportunity, that moment to apologize to my mom. So from 16, I started going down this wayward road of darkness and despair, and had a lot of anger built up in me with that. So 17 years old, I was arrested for selling crack cocaine inside of the school in 1989. This is doing when the crack epidemic was very at a heightened point in the South and around this country. I eventually got sentenced to 90 days shock probation. And in that period of time, I still did not have an opportunity to process the grief. No one really asked me what was going on with me. You know, like most people, they just see a response, behavior, and they immediately want to address the behavior, not knowing that just like a tree, it has roots. And with every individual that acts out or do certain things in the community, there's a root problem. There's a core, something that is taking place at that person's core that needs to be addressed, not just the external behavior. But for me, I was placed in a 90-day shock probation period sentence, served that 90 days. 18 months later, my life changed. As not only did my life change forever, but the life of other individuals changed, and I'll continue to expound upon that as we go deeper into this conversation.
You remind me a little bit of Nelson Mandela.
That's a great honor, brother. Like beyond flattering. Yeah.
You went through some things, whether they were right or wrong, and you came out with the positivity. Hold on, give me 1 second.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long
Bro, you about to make me cry over here, bro. I ain't trying to cry, man. You know,
Yeah.
Nelson
Under
Mandela.
we're gonna get you to cry. We didn't have many to cry before. That's
Yeah,
fine.
Nelson Mandela's story, man. You know, going back again, that when I was 19, I was sentenced to life in prison. I was sentenced to life in prison for killing someone over a drug dispute. And I remember sitting in that prison, and one of the prison chaplains gave me 2 books. One of the first books he gave me was As a Man Thinketh, So Is He by James Allen. And the second book he gave me was A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. And I remember reading Nelson Mandela's story and seeing how, you know, of course, he wasn't a person that sold drugs in the community. I'm not making that comparison, but he gave me the framework and how I should live my life of redemption while incarcerated and after my incarceration, you know, and that he gave me a framework in how to do my time in the most productive way. So like I said, that right there was kind of touching, because that book was one of the books that gave me the framework and the aspiration to dig deep within myself, to find redemption, make amends for the crime that I committed, and to return back into my community to be an asset. So, yeah.
Backing it up, when you were 16 years old,
Mm-hmm.
did you fit the typical teenage role that nobody can tell you nothing?
Yeah, I was that teenager, just like every one of us. Like I said, I was in that rebellious stage, 16 years old, but mounted on that rebellion, I was also dealing with a thing called grief that I did not know the words to be able to articulate my grief. And no one never really asked me that question, like, how did the death of your mother affect you? No one never asked me that question. Only thing I would always, people would say is that you're going to be okay. But being okay and not asking the question, like, how could I help you, or what, you know, like try to like help you understand that death at 16 years old, when you're losing someone close to you, is something that you don't want to hear the term, it's going to be okay at 16. It's like, how do you help me get to that be okay? You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing that I see like when I see people in my community now experiencing death, I don't like to tell them it's going to be okay. It's like, how could I help you get to that next level of being okay? You know, because after the funeral's over, people go into their own worlds. When the people who have experienced a loss, those are the ones that got to continue finding a way to be okay.
Right. In our era, I think me and you may be close in age. I'm from South Carolina, you know, just as well as you. And how I grew up, probably you experienced the same thing. You don't ask any questions. If you grieve, you don't show emotions as a male. So therefore, you know, you still had some learning to do. Even your mother passed away. You were 16 years old. So I'm not sure if you had someone to talk to, you know, at that young of age, or guidance, but you seemed like you were kind of on your own a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I had my father, and just like you said, my father came up he was born in the 50s. Again, that's stereotypical concept of men don't cry, men don't show their emotions. So I have 3 other sisters, and I'm the only boy. And it was okay for them to grieve, but it wasn't okay for me because I didn't see my father reflected that. So again, that's that thing where when men project this hard exterior of we don't cry, and you got young kids, young boys looking at you to figure something out, and you're not showing that emotion, then for me, I internalized mine, and mine turned into a level of anger, and I went into the streets, and that's when my life just started going down this dark hole.
Wow. Through all of that, though, you're a warrior, and you remind me of this dude right here, because you're a bad man to even be on here. I'm gonna play a little clip for you.
All right, cool.
Should be coming up in a second.
So I took him in 7. You took him in 7. I am the king of the world. Hold it. I'm pretty. Hold it. You're not that pretty. I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world.
You remind me of him a little bit, because Muhammad Ali went to prison too, and he did some positive things. Sometimes it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Agreed. I fully agree with you on that.
Yes, and that's how that goes. So moving forward, you went to prison. You did around 22 years for murder. Could you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, like I said, at 19 years old, from 17 to 19, I chose the profession of selling drugs, and I started selling drugs in came with everything that came with that lifestyle. I participated in at that time, and unfortunately, someone lost their life in this poor decision I made in selling drugs. But then on top of that poor decision, I ended up making the choice to pull the trigger and take another human being life over drugs. So I was sentenced to life in prison for that crime. And when I remember sitting in prison, maybe about my first couple of years in prison, I was trying to figure out, like, how do I find peace, or how do I find redemption in a situation where I have done something that I will never be able to take back? It's like I released something, a bullet that left out of a gun that pierced another human being's soul, and I cannot live with the fact that that person no longer will return back to this world. And so with that, man, I remember sitting in prison trying to figure that out. Like, how do I live with the death of another human being? And this is when I started praying and fasting, and I realized that God placed on my heart the only way that I can make peace with that is that I have to make peace with my victims. I cannot find something inside of that prison to help me escape it. Many people in prison, when they commit violent crimes such as the one that I committed, they find any distractions to keep them distracted from that. For me, I didn't want to use the distractions of the prison environment to make me lose sight of what I did. So I had to literally sit in what I did. And that meant blocking out all of the external things and really focus internally and spiritually to make a deeper connection with my victims, to begin to make amends for that. And that's where I had to have that real honest conversation with my victim's spirit and make amends with him before I can go and do anything else with my life. I needed to make peace with him. And once I was able to make peace with him, I was able to move in a different way in my life, which connected me to a gift, connected me to my purpose. And I remember telling my victim the night in which I began that spiritual dialogue with him is that I will live my life in a way to continue to honor you for the rest of my life. And that's when I found peace with that, when I was able to make peace with my victims.
Were you ever in denial when everything happened, that
Yeah.
You just didn't feel any remorse?
Yeah, denial, and like I tell people, denial is a normal response when you're going through something traumatic. You want to do everything intentionally to block out that traumatic experience. Taking another human being life, that's a traumatic thing. To know that these hands took another human being life over something as frivolous as drugs. Second, now you're placed in a prison system for the rest of your life. So automatically you're going to create these walls of denial to block out. And this is what I'm saying. A lot of people, when they commit these violent crimes, such as the one I committed, it is normal for them to create walls of denial and anything that they can do to deflect the real issue. You know what I'm saying? But for me, I chose not to deflect. I chose not to continue to live behind those walls, because those walls would have not bring me peace. And it's a hell of a thing to be sitting in a physical prison, and then on top of that physical prison, you're living in a mental, spiritual prison from the actions of which you have engaged in. So yeah, it's a normal thing that people would do, but I chose not to live like that, because I knew that that's not the way I was raised. And I knew that my spiritual belief is that I had to find peace with that in order for me to bring about peace in my own life.
Wow, that's a blessing, man. I mean, wow. When you got to prison, it's always a stigma that you're a young dude, wild, nobody can tell you nothing. So some of the inmates look at you like this right here.
Who is you?
I mean, of course. I mean, people, you're right, man. It's a stigma that comes with going to prison, but most importantly, being given a life sentence in prison. See, people expect you to act a certain way when you're given life in prison. Like for me, they expected me to come to prison with a life sentence and lose all hope, to become a product of the prison environment. I chose not to become a product of the prison environment, meaning that I began to make that atonement and reconciliation and redemption is my navigation tool, my GPS, in order for me to find peace with my own life. Because I could not live inside of a prison in that mental torturing and guilt, not only the guilt of my mother, but now I got to live with the guilt that I took another human being life. That is a hell of a thing to sit in for so long in a prison environment and do all of these activities and engage in doing whatever to numb a pain. I didn't want to continue to run from that. I wanted to sit in and I wanted to embrace that and take a lesson from it.
Let's talk about your book. I think it's the 5 steps to
5 stages.
Yeah, 5 stages. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's inform everybody about that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The 5 stages of incarceration was just a personal journey of me finding my path to redemption. My path to redemption, as I said, it was a normal response for me to go to prison and become a product of the prison environment. Now, what I mean by that product of that environment, meaning just engage in activities that people normally would do. But I chose to start journaling. I started journaling in 1994 after watching an Oprah Winfrey show, where she spoke about the power of gratitude and how gratitude shifts your mindset and start making you more appreciative of your blessing. Here it is. I'm right now at 22 years old, sitting in prison. In 1994, I still had to wait for 2008 before I became eligible to even go see a parole board. And you can imagine from 1994 to 2012, this is a long journey to walk, right? So what I started doing is when she mentioned about gratitude, I started focusing on writing my gratitude every day about what 5 things that I'm grateful for and 5 things I'm grateful before I go into bed. And that began shifting in me, showing me that in spite of my circumstances, that I had a lot to be thankful for. And on top of that, again, it was an extension of saying, hey, being that you cannot speak to a counselor in prison, what is the best way to stop processing a lot of your grief and your trauma and all this stuff? And I started doing writing. And then from there, I started realizing that there were different stages of incarceration. There was a self-denial stage where most people put these walls up of all of the pain that they experience, they block it out. Second stage was the anger. This is where people are full of anger and they want to release their anger. The third is victimization. This is that deflecting stage where they want to deflect what the real issues are and blame it on everyone else, take the victim role instead of seeing that you're the person that created people's pain and harm. And the last 2 stages, what I call the true stage of transformation, which was forgiveness, where a person in spite of who you are and where you come from, there's a point in your life where you have to begin to bring about a level of understanding of forgiveness, not only from God, because I say it's easy to go to God and say, oh, God, forgive me, because you don't see it. God, forgive me, you can walk away from that. But what's the hardest thing is for a man or woman to look themselves in the mirror and forgive themselves, and to take the time and to forgive those who have harmed them. And that's what I did. And from there, I started writing letters to those who I harmed, meaning that I would write days and weeks. I would write in my journal letters to people who I intentionally harmed. I would go back as far as I can remember about people who I hurt. Because again, when you're talking about redemption, you have to be focused on forgiveness. And it can't be that superficial form of forgiveness. It means that you got to really do a deep dive into understanding that level of forgiveness, which will bring you on the other side, which is called transformation, which is the 5th stage of incarceration. And that's what I mentioned in my book.
Right. In the African-American community, it seems like moving past what you went to prison for. I'm going to bring up a point and see what you guys think about this. It seems like in our race, it's hard to forgive. And some people, you can try to forgive them. They don't want you to forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that, T. Smalls?
Oh, yeah, man. Once you did a crime or whatever, man, just like the saying goes, man, your past doesn't define your future. You know what I'm saying? You find redemption, man. You went to prison. You paid your debt to society. You send out letters, man. You ask for forgiveness, man. You just did a 360 with your life, and it's phenomenal. It's sad that some people still hold on to that grudge, but on the flip side, they would want the same thing for their family member if it happened to them. If it was vice versa, if the tables was reversed, they would want that in return. But since it's not that way, they hold a grudge for all these years. Oh, he did this or he did that, not knowing that, look, man, it's the past is the past. If you did everything you're supposed to do to, find redemption, to console yourself, hey, you didn't fall a victim, man. Just like you say, you had a life sentence. Here you are today, man. Like the song say with Drake, this is God's plan. This was God's plans for you from the beginning, so you can see the true you, the true person you are, despite what you've been through in the past, man. What I'm saying?
I agree with you on that. I always say that, I always say that it's like an unfortunate thing that someone had to lose their life, but in the same situation, God revealed who I am. But just to go back to touch back on the power of forgiveness, is like you said, forgiveness is a very touchy thing for a lot of people, because like I said, when you harm someone, it's hard for people to forgive you when you If you step on their shoes, that may be a different thing. But when you take a human being life, take a loved one, it's harder. And I'm so thankful. And I tell people, because I was able to do the work. And as I said, from the beginning in early part of 1994, I was able to not focus on the physical people who was connected to my victim. I focused on my victim, the spirit of my victim. That was the person that I had to make peace with before anybody else. You see what I'm saying? And I was willing to be in that discomfort space to be able to make amends with him before I made amends with anybody else. And that's when, for me, making that amends and putting that work in, God began to open other doors for me, where to a point years later down the road, the family heart shifted and they said that we no longer hold a grudge to you. So I tell people, sometimes you have to go into those discomfort spaces of the people you have harmed. You have to begin working with them. And if they don't accept it, it is okay, but you have to put in the work to understand the power of forgiveness and why forgiveness is so vital for growth and transformation.
Right. We have a question for you, T. Smalls. What they say, let me put it up real quick.
At what age did he begin his journey towards forgiveness?
I would say, like I said, I would go back into maybe when I was about 25. Because from 19, again, my first couple years in prison, I was a little confused. I wanted to create all of these walls that I wanted to block out that guilt, that harm. But once I was able to realize that in order for me to not, and when I say die, I'm not talking about physical death in prison. I'm talking about a mental death in prison. I remember seeing people who was given a very similar sentence as myself, died in prison because they were not able to break away from the mental prison. And here it is, I'm living in a physical and a mental prison. So when I was about 25 years old, I realized that the worst form of imprisonment is a mental prison, where you torture yourself with not understanding the power of forgiveness and being man enough to say, hey, I acknowledge my mistakes, and would you forgive me?
Amen to that.
Amen to that. Yep.
A lot of individuals don't get to that stage. They'd rather die in guilt and hurt without saying they're sorry.
Yeah, that's a painful thing, and I choose not to live like that. Here's, like I said, you cannot even imagine what it felt like to live in out of physical prison and knowing that you will not possibly see freedom ever again, and to live in that. I didn't want it to get high in prison to run from it. See, people get high. People use different kinds of narcotics. They use different things to create a numbness from the pain. I didn't want to run from the pain no more. I ran from it when I was 16 years old when my mom's passed away. I ran at 17, using drugs and doing all of the stupid stuff to numb a pain that when I would go to bed at night, that pain still would be there. When I was in prison for taking another human being life, I knew that I could not live in that prison environment, finding some form of narcotic, finding whatever, being a violent person, because I know at the end of the day, when I lay in my bed, I still had to sleep with that spirit of that person who I took. So I had to make peace with that. And I had to do it with a sober mind, not some intoxicated mind.
That's a blessing. In prison, did God give you an intervention that he just struck you down and say, come on in, that's enough, I got you?
That's when I said that night, there was a point in my incarceration where I was praying and fasting so many days and nights, trying to understand how to make peace out of this hellish situation I put myself in. And that's when God placed that the only way that I could be able to find peace is not through something external. I cannot, just like you cannot find happiness in anything external. And the word came to me is that I can only find peace is that when I make peace with the person who I truly harm. I can go and apologize to my girlfriend, my wife, my kids. I can go to apologize as a family, but I have a spirit that I have to be able to be able to embrace the discomfort of speaking to the spirit of someone in which I took his life over drugs, and I had to make peace with that. And from there, everything else became easy for me in my journey of redemption.
Amen. That's a blessing. Hey, Smalls, what we got right here?
Sometimes you can do your time, and sometimes time just not good enough for people, because the people will remind you of what you did. In other words.
Wow.
I mean, that may be true. I mean, you got some people, but that's why I'm a very transparent person. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not going to hide from who I used to be. You know what I'm saying? And some people choose to do that, but that's them. Because going back again is that once I put in the work into becoming a better person, I did not do it for show and tell. I did it for me. And this is the thing. So whether you like it or you don't like it, I'm at peace with it.
Right.
I'm at peace with if you don't accept my honesty. I'm at peace with that because I made peace with the one person I needed to make peace with. If you don't like it, I'm cool with it.
Right.
And so this is what a lot of people have to understand is that when you make peace with whatever it is that you need to make peace with, you comfortable in your own skin. I don't need anything to define who I am. To define who I am, I'm gonna speak my truth and I'm gonna walk away from it.
Right. And clap for that. That was deep, right?
Yeah. That's the true meaning, man, of called rehabilitation, man. That's the true meaning right there of getting yourself rehabilitated, man. Meaning that, look, man, you're not the same person you went in. You came out a totally different person, man. That's deep right there, man. That's deep.
That's the work, man. That's just that work, and that's what I'm all about. When it's even about my book, The 5 Stages of Incarceration, when I talk to families, I tell families, like, if you wanting your loved one to have true rehabilitation, I'm an example of that. Meaning that I went in at 19 years old and I emerged out of that system a completely different person. Went in with a 7th grade level of education. Now people calling me to speak at different places and not realizing that at one point in my life, I was afraid to speak. I failed in everything in school. Now I'm an author, I'm a life coach, I'm this, I'm that. You see what I'm saying? Because going back again, I understood that adversity had the seed of something great in it. And I just had to, again, make peace with the situation first in order for the greatness to be emerged out of the situation. Amen.
Moving right along to I think it was about 1993, the crime bill came out with Bill Clinton in 94. Mm-hmm. And the president-elect Joe Biden, I think, has something to do with it. Mm-hmm. And I know you're a big person as far as the crime bill. How do you feel about that, moving forward to the crime reform we have today? Any progress?
I would say
before you answer, hold on a second. We have guys probably stole some Adidas in I'm gonna say 96 doing 30 years.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And I'm sure you've probably seen some of those examples. Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Man, I'm a firm believer, man, that we definitely need to change our criminal justice system in so many ways. That in 1994, when the Anonymous Crime Bill was signed under Bill Clinton, not only did Bill Clinton or Joe Biden, but we talking about Black and brown elected officials endorse that same bill. Because at that time, they had created this boogeyman called the crack man in our communities, and they demonized Black people and brown people with the drug epidemic so bad that they convinced our people to pass laws, not understanding the impact that this anonymous crime bill will have on the community for the next 10 to 20, 30 years. People didn't see that part of it. Just like some people agree with the bill, but they don't see the fine print in the bill. The fine print in the bill denied and stripped Black and brown people, man, from a lot of the legal procedures that were one time protected them. Just like in the prison environment, some people say, why there's no true rehabilitation inside of the prisons today? The reason why is because in 1994, when this bill was passed, it stripped all of the rehabilitation programs for violent offenders, particularly. I was a violent offender serving life at 19, and they told me I could never go to one class in prison, right? So hey, I'm sitting in prison, just stay sit on the shelf and just do your time. That's what the Anonymous Crime Bill did. The Anonymous Crime Bill scripted all of the funds that went into rehabilitation on the front end of the prison system, meaning going into communities and creating more youth programs. They script that money, and these monies went into building prisons. It went to building prisons, hiring more prison staff, and hiring more officers and lawyers, all of this stuff, and all of the money was stripped out of the community. So now here we are 30 years later, and the Anonymous Crime Bill still has an impact on the Black and brown community. Now we have a new elected president, and we're hoping that, we would hope that here in South Carolina, we know here in South Carolina, we were the ones that put him on the map to be able to get the votes that he has now to be in the position to be the president, right? We know what South Carolina gave him, boosted his campaign and put him back on the map because he was not doing well when he was in the primary in South Carolina, right?
Right.
So now here it is, the next 100 days is no real conversation centered around what are we going to do with this criminal justice reform? And I'm not talking about some superficial conversation. I'm talking about how do we go back and start repealing some of these bills that have been depriving people. We have been passing laws making marijuana legal, and you still got people still confined to prisons. Still in prisons. People are now denied SNAP benefits because they have a felony conviction, a drug charge, and the drug charge are not distinguished that they were, using drugs. They just say they have a drug charge. You have some of some of the people in our communities who are incarcerated as a drug user, but they were sentenced as a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Right.
And they take all of this opportunity is taken from them now. So some, like when you're talking about Pell Grant opportunity, when you're talking about financial aid, if you have a drug charge and under the anonymous crime bill, they said you cannot get financial aid because you have a drug charge. Some people who have SNAP benefits, you cannot get it because you have a drug charge. Now you have felony convictions. Now you can't even rent apartments because you have a felony convictions. Yes. Now companies and jobs are denying you opportunity for employment because you have a felony conviction. So as Michelle Alexander said in one of her books called The New Jim Crow Law, we're living now with this new Jim Crow law, meaning that we have black and white couldn't go certain places. Now they're saying because you have a felony conviction, you can't live here after you have served time. You cannot live a certain place. You cannot go at a certain job. You cannot rent this. You cannot go to school. They're putting you back into that civil rights era where you was not able to do a lot of things because of that Jim Crow. White and black couldn't go here. Now you got a felony conviction. You can't go here. You can't do that.
Let me ask you this. Since President-elect Biden, you know, he was endorsed by Jim Clyburn, that's his name, I'm sure, in South Carolina. Do you feel that President-elect Biden has a lot of pressure on him to make it right from the crime bill? Because I'm more than positive. I think he did apologize publicly.
Yeah, Jim Clyburn, I've heard a couple of interviews from Congressman Jim Clyburn was saying that he would hope that for the first 100 days that there is a committee set up to go and start looking at how they can begin to fix our broken criminal justice system. You know, it's just a matter of getting that done. But the thing that, not to get too deep into politics, but just understand that for so long, the people who have been impacted the most by the crimes are less likely to have a real conversation with the policymakers. What does that mean? That I know what it felt like to be in prison for 22 years. I know what it felt like. All of these different things that we have people who have never experienced nothing about incarceration trying to create policies without asking the people who experience it the most. That's just like they said, how could a man tell a woman how to have a baby when God did not create you to have a baby? He created a woman. So you cannot go and talk about a woman's body. A man should never be able to talk about a woman's body excluded out of the conversation, right? So that's the same thing when we're talking about Joe Biden or whomever, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that their conversation should not be speaking to policymakers. It should be coming into the community and doing listening sessions in the community for those who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system. What are their needs? How could we assist them in becoming people that are now positive contributors to our society instead of keeping them marginalized and excluded on the outer fringe of the community? How do we bring them in and integrate them in our community? And that means by, again, having listening sessions, understanding the impact of these laws. When you up here, you don't see what's going on below.
Right.
You don't see when a man just walk out of prison all enthusiastic about starting his life over again, and then they tell him he can't get a job. And he has 2 or 3 kids and he's trying to start his life over again. And you saying he can't get a job, not because he doesn't want to work, but you're telling him he's unable to get a job because of a crime that he committed at 19 years old in 1990. Here it is 2020, and he's still being denied access to employment.
Right.
I think they need to change that too. I know in South Carolina, you're not allowed to apologize to the victim's family. So
that's crazy.
When you had that moment, did you take a gasp of fresh air and say, it's over, it's done?
When I walked out of prison?
No, when you had a chance to apologize to the family, did you take that gasp of fresh air and say, well, I can move forward?
Technically, you know, like you said, going back again to just the whole criminal justice system, right? Part of rehabilitation is it should never be a situation where there's not a restorative justice, meaning that if a person committed a crime, it should never keep a victim away from the offender. There should be an arbitration take place where it's preparing people to heal from a damage. We're in a society where it's that the victims never get a chance to heal from the pain. The offender never heals from the pain. So even while I was in prison, I was denied opportunity to have a real conversation with the victims about what actually happened and to let them know that changed. And that's just the law, which I don't agree with that law. Even when I got out of prison, because I was still on a lifetime parole, part of my condition of parole was that I could not have a conversation with my victim. One of the most painful things for me as I continue this journey of redemption is that the family, the individual father was still alive at this time, and he wanted to have a conversation with me.
Right.
He heard that I was out. He was not opposed to me making parole, right? I made parole. He was not opposed to it. And he found out, like, I know something happened to this young man in prison that changed his life. I would love to have a conversation with this young man, right? The parole system had it set up that even though the father wanted to have a conversation with me, have a sit down with me, I still could not do it. So when you ask about me being able to breathe, in a way, I haven't had opportunity to really breathe because of course he had siblings, but the father was the person that I wanted to have the conversation with. And the law says that no, we couldn't do it. And so we had to create this interview, a video where he was able to hear me through a video, which is very impersonal, especially someone that took this man's son a very impersonal way. And to hear him say, yes, I would love for him to sit. That was the one thing that still bothers me to this day, because I did not have that opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation with a man whose son I took off this earth. And he wanted to ask me some very personal questions that could not be conveyed through a video. So I had an opportunity to breathe in a lot of ways, but I felt like our system again is to change when it comes to that, giving people that opportunity to heal. I'm so thankful we had opportunity to exchange videos, but it's a lot of change can be done with that too.
Right. Moving in today's generation of these young males, that's got their pants down. I'm not sure if you speak to some of these youth or were they different, or are they different from what you experienced as a 16-year-old 20-something years ago?
Not really. They got the same issues, man. They just got the same issues, and it's just a matter of us being able to understand that we were that age once too, and we have to come down. I'm 48 years old now. I cannot speak to a 16-year-old with a 48-year-old mindset, expect for him or her to comprehend everything, because I was there. I have to use my experience as a 16-year-old to be able to tap into that other 16-year-old kid that I'm talking to be able to find something that's relatable, to show that I'm not one preaching, but I understand. See, we have to understand that these young people in a position, they only acting out what they see. And when we come down sometime and be judgmental, and what we call mentoring is actually judgmental, because mentoring is meet them where they're at and walk them through, give them a strategy and helping them move to the next level. We go in looking at the pans and losing sight of the whole point. The pans is just one thing, but we don't know what the internal thing, because we got so distracted on just the pans. There's a lot of emotional stuff that our youth are dealing with. You're talking about trauma. You're talking about mental health. You're talking about so much stuff that has shaped them in a way that put them in a position. All we sometimes see is the tip of the iceberg instead of going beneath and say, man, there's some stuff deeper right here in these young people that we really need to pay attention to, but we get sidetracked.
I'm glad you said mental health. We did a podcast on that about 8 months ago, and I broke down from my views where it started at, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said. I think it started from slavery. I'm going to bring it up to 2020. I'm going to use my family. My grandmother was born in 1918. So, of course, her mother was born around 1890. So my great-grandmother was born, I think I seen the records, around 1850. Either was her grandmother or her mother around 1850. So, of course, that's the slave era. So, therefore, you do what you're told, shut your mouth, don't ask no questions. My grandmother was born in 1918. She had kids. So that's the old school era. My grandmother's grandparents came from the slave era. So moving forward to the 1940s, I guess she had kids. So, and that's the era I was raised in. And then a lot of African-American males and females, keep your mouth shut, don't ask no questions. So you have all these problems. Who are you going to talk to? You have nobody to talk to. So now it's 2020, and the same thing is kind of going on in life today. That's why I created Let's Talk Under the Tree podcast. You don't have to be afraid. We thank you for coming on here, telling your story too. T. Smalls have shared a few things, during his childhood and how he grew up, and going to mental health with the young, youth that you talk to somebody, and I'm glad that you have the path to redemption to talk to people and try to, give them some insights that they can speak. It's a mental health healing. And in our community, the first thing we say, and especially in South Carolina, oh, he or she is crazy. They bread not done. I'm sure you heard that before. Or we use the words that say cracky. You know,
Yeah.
you heard that before too. He or she is cracky. Yeah, and we need to stop that and get to know the individual. Not to be long-winded, it was a co-worker of mine, a white guy. His father died maybe a year ago. He said he was raised in the house with his own father that never had conversations. So he's looking at his daddy in the casket. He said he was looking at basically a complete stranger. Yeah, he don't even know this man that was raised in the house with him. So it's not just the African American community. The reason why I said that, because I'm African American, that's all I know. So my coworker confided in me, as far as what to do. His sister gave him some artifacts. His dad was retired military, gave him some artifacts. Remember the old trunks we used to put clothes in? And he said it took him five months to open it up because he didn't even know who the hell this man was that raised him in the house. And I said, wow, white folks go through the same thing also. But mental health, go talk to somebody and, get some counseling. Just because you see a psychiatrist, we say the word shrink. They're not shrinks. They're a psychological doctor, somebody for you to talk to.
Yeah, I think that we need to do more education in the Black community, Black and brown community, when it comes down to mental health, because mental health is a thing that is another one of those things that is destroying the Black community. We talk about the drug epidemic, but we don't talk about the mental health issues.
Right.
Mothers out of the house, taking fathers out of the house, and passing this generation of trauma from one generation to the next generation. And it's hurting us in a lot of ways. So I think that we need to have more open conversation about what mental health looks like. And it's okay to sit down and talk to a counselor or therapist. It's okay to understand that when you're going through something, that you don't need to find relief in some form of narcotics or alcohol. You can find that by talking to someone to help you understand what it is that you're processing and how do you process it. There's so much that we can be doing in our communities. But like I said, we're still carrying this generational thing where you got a problem, just go to the club, dance it, shoot somebody, drink, smoke some weed, drugs, you okay. That's our therapist, and it's harmed us more so than anything else in our community, man.
Yeah, we have one more last question. What they say, Smalls?
Growth gives us power to accept responsibility for our own actions so that we can ask for forgiveness and make peace.
Facts.
Right. One more last one. I know I said that earlier. You have one more direct question. Go ahead, Smalls.
How are you using your experience to rehabilitate and help others?
Oh, great question. Great question. One of the things that as you can go to my website, pathtoredemption.org, and you would see, I have a book right now, which is called The 5 Stages of Incarceration, where I've been using this book over the last 17 years of my life, where I've transformed thousands of men inside of that prison and helping them find their own redemption. This is not a book that I just wrote when I came home. I was teaching this book for 17 years inside of prison, where I help individuals find their own, again, understand their mindset, behaviors. Once they change their mindset, change their behavior, they're going to live more abundantly in spite of the situation where they're at. So that's one way I've been doing it. The second thing is I created Palm Yard Release. I created a Path to Redemption support group, where I focus on helping individuals turn their setbacks into come-ups. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you turn a setback into something that you can move forward? So I focusing on helping them readjust their emotional triggers. What are your emotional triggers? What are those things? What are your emotional triggers that may lead you back down that road? Have a better sense of self-awareness of who you are, connect yourself to a purpose so that you can get out of this environment and appreciate this second chance by knowing who you are and what you want out of life. So with the Path to Redemption support group, that's where I focus on, is helping them understand their level of emotional intelligence, understanding their triggers, and be able to be in a safe space where they can talk about what they're struggling with so that we can help them work through that process instead of them going to a family member. Most family members, when their loved one come home from prison, they don't know how to communicate with them. Family members don't know how to communicate with a person that's been gone for 20 years in prison. They don't know how. They don't know. And this person may be displaying a behavior of depression, may be displaying a behavior of anxiety. It may cause them to go back to prison if you don't help them understand what those behaviors are. And that's what I do with my organization, Path to Redemption. So that's how I help people in their rehabilitation after prison, using my lived experience.
Hey, man, if you could leave your mark on something, what would that be?
What do you mean, like leave my mark on the world? Oh, yeah, I think definitely. I would say doing what I'm doing right now. This is not really about me. It's about the promise I made to my victim that night inside my prison cell. So it's like, how do I continue to live my life to honor him? So my mark would be is continue to make an impact, but keeping my word to my victim.
That's a blessing, man. And you're doing it. And I admire you for stepping forward and trying to help somebody, you know. And I'm a firm believer it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
I agree, my brother. I agree.
Right.
Yeah, right, y'all, man. I appreciate you.
And I always say sometimes success will make you cry.
It definitely does, my brother. It definitely does. So I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. We enjoyed you today, everybody. We hope you guys had a good time. Mr. Lester Young, Hilton Head, right?
Yeah, Hilton Head.
Hilton Head, South Carolina. I heard y'all got some pretty good crabs and shrimp out there.
I love it. Need some tacos too, brother.
Yeah. Peace, Pauls.
Yeah, man.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead and say a little prayer for everybody, and especially for Mr. Lester Young, that he keeps going forward and God bless him in his journey, that he makes some positive strides with his organization and things like that.
God, I thank you right now. I thank you for Mr. Lester Young. Thank you for saving his life, God. Thank you for saving his life. Keep him on the path that he's on. God, is not how you start, it's how you finish. He's touching people's lives with the work he's doing in the community right now. His path to redemption is clear. With that being said, keep all negative things out of his path and keep him on the straight. In your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. T Smalls, even though you did slid in here like Eddie Kane on the 5 Heartbeats, we'll let you pass on that. That's another. You got to
sorry for the tardiness, but you know.
You got to sing your song you thought I was gonna forget. Go ahead and hit it. Make it right. Says you was a little late. Go ahead and make it right.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A beautiful day in the neighborhood. Won't you be mine? Won't you be mine? There it is.
Mr. Lester Young, stay on here for about 30 seconds after we get off, if you don't mind.
Great, brother. Thank you.
We love everybody. It's going to be a good week. Y'all have a Merry Christmas. Happy holidays and all that. Don't forget to wear your mask. Let's Talk Under the Tree have some big things in 2021. We thank everybody for all the support as usual. And we out of here. Y'all have a blessed night.